The Soviets began the space race by creating the first satellite, which was named Sputnik.
Within weeks, the Soviets launched another satellite into Earth's orbit, Sputnik 2. It was much bigger and heavier than Sputnik 1. It also carried a passenger, a dog named Laika.
The United States joined the space race about 3 months later.
At Cape Canaveral, Florida, the Army's Jupiter C rocket is ready for America's second attempt to launch a space satellite. No relation to the IRBM Jupiter, this is a rebuilt Redstone, a 200-mile missile carrying, instead of a warhead, 3 stages of solid fuel booster rockets and the Explorer, a 6-foot bullet only inches across, crammed with electronic gear. 30 pounds of payload.
The next major space victory belonged to the Soviets. They sent the first man into space. In April 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was launched into the vehicle known as Vostok. He remained in space for less than 2 hours, and he landed safely by parachute near a village in Russia.
Less than a month later, the United States sent its first astronaut into space. His name was Alan Shepard. Shepard remained in space only for about 15 minutes, and he didn't reach Earth's orbit. His flight came in February 1962 alongside John Glenn.
Later that same year, the United States tried to have one spacecraft get very close to another spacecraft while in orbit. This was the first step in getting spacecraft to link or dock together. Docking would be necessary to land men on the moon. The plan called for a Gemini spacecraft carrying 2 astronauts to get close to an unmanned satellite. However, the attempt failed. The target satellite exploded as it separated from its main dock. America's space agency decided to move forward and launch the next in its Gemini series.
In January 1959, the Soviets launched a series of unmanned lunar rockets. The third of these flights took pictures of the far side of the moon. This was a sight no one on Earth had ever seen. The United States planned to explore the moon with its unmanned Ranger spacecraft. There were a number of failures before Ranger 7 took pictures of the moon. The world did not get pictures from the surface of the moon until the Soviet Luna 9 landed there in February 1966.
Russia's also racked up more and more space firsts. The first dual-man flight, the first woman in space, the first 3-man flight, and the first spacewalk. Many Americans saw Russia as the enemy, and the enemy was winning. NASA needed a major achievement to turn it around, so they focused on one big, bright finish line: the moon.
We choose to go to the moon because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win along with the others too.
For the next few years, both the United States and the Soviet Union continued the exploration of the moon. Yet the question remained, which one would be the first to put a man there? In December 1968, the United States launched Apollo 8 with 3 astronauts. The flight proved that a spacecraft could orbit the moon and return to Earth safely.
The space race was over, and the United States was victorious as Neil Armstrong became the first man to land on the moon, uttering the famous phrase,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
In conclusion, the space race played a significant role in the overall timeline of the Cold War, with many domestic changes that affected both the US and the USSR, psychologically, politically, economically, and ideologically. It ignited patriotism and cooperation in both camps that would help it last through even the darkest days of the Cold War.